The video has spoilers. Do you have a burning passion for underage Japanese girls? Have you ever wanted to engage those girls in contractually obliged child grooming? And finally, do you want a way to monetize their rapidly deteriorating mental health? If so, then welcome to the world of idols. Idol Manager is a realistic Twitter simulator where the answer is always the exploitation of child labor. Your only defined goal is to become the perfect capitalist, so get ready to suck off China. If you don't have the mental fortitude required to achieve this noble task, then enjoy not having a harem. Here's some pointers. Pay your idols a maximum of 1 yen a week and hire doctors who constantly inject them with dopamine and steroids so they can work forever. They won't complain, and if they do, just fire them before they can quit. That way you both ruin their career and save your ego. Alternatively, you could pay your employees a livable wage and politely abuse your position as their employer to get with them, but then she'd just have an affair and win the kids anyways, leaving you broke, alone, and turning to misogyny.
What? What the fuck? Oh my god, no!
If you're still confused, Idol Manager is a business sim that aims to simulate the real idol industry. If you don't know anything about the idol industry, just think child actors, except way more abused. If that doesn't clear things up, don't worry, the game will explain it, and also question it. A lot of the game's dialogue suggests that there is something greater than conforming to the standards of the industry to turn a profit, but when I said the only defined goal is to become the perfect capitalist, that wasn't a suggestion. Throughout the story, you'll be presented with choices that don't lead to profit, and trust me, you don't want to pick those. While you could break the standards of the industry and reach for something greater, is there really anything greater than money? As you ponder my subtle foreshadowing, grab some orange juice and glue your eyes to the screen so that I may walk you through the time machine that is Idol Manager. To start, you're gonna want to pick story mode, as free play is just kinda lame. From there, you're going to be shown 3 difficulty levels, and unless you're a clairvoyant, I recommend following the game's advice and not picking unfair for your first playthrough. It takes a special kind of willpower to soft lock a 12-hour save and not jihadi bomb the nearest preschool, a willpower I'm not confident many of you have. Think of this game as the Dark Souls. After you pick normal, you'll get a tutorial which walks you through the basics of the game, and I highly recommend you follow it, at least up until you start gambling on girls. You see, there's different levels of slave auctions you can hold, and each has a different % chance of getting you shiny women, who depending on the level of shininess will have drastically increased stats. If you follow the tutorial, you get a guaranteed shiny girl at any level of audition, and thus we take our first baby step into abusing this game's questionably playtested features. I won't go too in-depth, as figuring out how to break the game is half the fun. However, I will say that just as it is in real life, streaming as a cute anime girl is quite the lucrative endeavor. Beyond this point, there isn't much more advice I'm willing to give. If I had to suffer an emotional breakdown due to the stress of running a multi-million-dollar company that employs a sorority of constantly horny teenage girls, then so do you. Ending your first few playthroughs with your employees absolutely despising you is half the fun, as is eventually finding out that making money isn't actually the hardest part. Yeah, just like in the real world, it's easy to scam people out of money, but incredibly difficult to convince them to subscribe. This aspect of the game will actually give you a very realistic glance into my life, as the optimal strategy for audience growth is to release a single, cross your fingers, and pray to RNGesus that the song goes viral. I say fan growth is the hardest part because at some points in the story you need a certain number of fans to progress, yet you don't actually need a lot of fans to make insane amounts of money. If you were initially optimizing for profit instead of growing your fan base, then you're going to find that the lack of information and design of the game encourages you to employ save scumming. Depending on how addicted you are to gambling, this can be incredibly annoying. This kind of hints at a massive part of the gameplay that in order to be the best, you have to fail at least once. Now, it's possible, but definitely not easy, to beat the game on your first playthrough, which is game design I kind of like. I definitely felt like a badass super genius when I replayed the story and dominated the market instead of being treated like everyone's autistic 4-year-old brother, but at the same time, I don't think I should have to know what's coming in the story to be able to beat it. Now, this might just be a case of me being terrible at video games. Looking back, I could see how if you get lucky or save scum enough, you could beat the game first try on normal, but at the very least, you should be aware that it will be an armpit sweat producing endeavor. I completed 2 playthroughs before I tried playing the main story on Unfair, one where I was cheated on and divorced by an idol I spent 4 real hours romancing who still won the kids in court, and one where I horrifically abused my idols in retaliation for my previous wife's entanglement, which ended with all of my idols individually telling me how much of a bastard I was right to my face. However, even with all of this deadening to my emotions and improved knowledge of the gameplay, I still got my ass kicked when doing the main story. Anyways, by now the basics should be pretty clear. For most of the game, your mouse will be flying around the screen faster than Rim became Best Girl, dragging girls in your office to harass them, negotiating business deals, clicking button, and keeping your idols from committing suicide. Oh, and yeah, as much as I've abused them, the idols aren't exactly replaceable. See, each accumulates individual fans, and when they leave the group, those fans do as well, so you're probably gonna want to get them indebted to you. Managing a company, however, is more than just business and suicide-proofing the offices. Your idols all have a life of their own, and on top of that, the internet is unpredictable, so sometimes you'll find yourself dealing with the best mechanic in the game.
Oh, scandals.
Whether it's an idol having a romantic fling with a politician, accidentally dressing up like a Nazi, or just trying to enjoy their life, Twitter will always find something to be mad about. The game even has a sort of Twitter feed that is written so realistically that it genuinely makes me hate non-existent people. There are even a couple of scandals based on real events. For example, the scandal that made me fall in love with this game was that one of my idols had said the N-word while streaming an American game without knowing what that word meant. There was something very similar to this that happened last year in the real world with a couple of VTubers, so I applied my knowledge of that real world event into the game, and would you frickin' know it, I made the right choice. The amount of both pain and pleasure I felt is only comparable to my discovery of Neanners. Even if you don't know their real world equivalent, most scandals can be solved if you're a rational person with critical thinking skills, and they do a great job of breaking up the admittedly sometimes monotonous gameplay. Speaking of breaking up the gameplay, I think it's about time we delved into the visual novel aspects of Idol Manager. There are a few different ways to activate visual novel scenes. If you're following the main story, then you're required to complete certain objectives and manually trigger them. If you want romantic scenes, then you have to spend time socializing and flirting with an idol. Other scenes are triggered through unspoken gameplay requirements or, as far as I can tell, random chance. The combination of all of these types of scenes makes you completely focused on the game, as you're always striving to complete a certain goal for the story, or micromanaging internal group drama so nobody lets it leak that you're dating your employee and you can make it to the next date without being cancelled. Of course, these visual novel segments wouldn't be much motivation if they weren't incredibly well written, which they are. The only filler scenes are those that are randomly activated, but even then they sometimes give you the opportunity to improve your relationship with whichever idol is involved, so your input and attention still matters. And even in scenes where your input doesn't really matter, an idol coming into your office because she mistook a medical device for a vibrator is fucking hilarious and makes the game feel that much more involved and real. Especially when they aren't very specific and you don't know the names of your employees, so you think you're gonna get a scene with an idol and a vibrator, but instead get jump scared by a marginally less hot doctor. Beyond those, every scene that you have to work for is imbued with an insane amount of meaning and content. You come away from each scene feeling like you've gained something personally, and even though admittedly these scenes don't always make sense in context, they are always written as though the character you're speaking to is really talking. Speaking of characters, they are both incredibly likable and incredibly unlikable, which ultimately makes them incredibly interesting. There was not a moment in the game where I was not engaged in the story. There were moments where the gameplay lost my focus, but every time a character was speaking, I was giving them my complete attention. The reporter character Aya, for example, made me genuinely reflect on how I present my ideas on this channel. It's been a long time since I went to bed shaking with excitement for Christmas, yet that is exactly the feeling I got when having to pause this game since it was 2 AM and oh my god, I have to get up at 7 tomorrow. In addition to breaking up the gameplay, the visual novel sections also break up the music. While the Idol Manager soundtrack is absolutely fantastic, by the end of the game this song is gonna give you severe PTSD. Not because it's connected to an intense scene, but because you hear it on loop while managing your group, which takes up over half your playtime. Every time you get a visual novel scene, the music either becomes muffled or switches to something completely new, freeing you from the porn music trap remix in your ears and allowing them a moment of respite. This not only allows you to fully take in and appreciate the new music, but also to really engage with the scene, because the longer the scene goes on, the longer you're free. Anyways, all of this is to say that I would highly recommend playing the main storyline. It starts out small, just like your company, but as your company grows, so too does the impact of the story and the moral dilemmas you have to face. The first arc is about participating in a local quiz show in order to win a primetime programming slot for your group. Low stakes with no real consequences, but it prepares you for what's to come, and by God, what comes next left me feeling like a fucking idiot sandwich for a week straight. The next arc has you getting an invitation to participate in what is essentially America's Got Talent, but for idol groups. Your rival is on the judging panel, and depending on how you feel about and understand them so far, things are either gonna go great or very poorly. A few days after the first episode airs, your rival makes a YouTube video boycotting the show and calling for your group and 2 others to do the same. You have to make the decision to stay in or pull out, and it's not as clear-cut as it may seem. All I'll say is that there is a right answer. You don't game over, but you can lose, and if you do, the game pours some serious salt in the wound. Also, regardless of what you choose, someone is going to be angry, and since you're the boss, it's up to you to deal with that fallout. The final arc has you competing against other idol groups for a chance to be the closing ceremony of the International Summer Athletic Games! It is at this point that I soft-locked my entire first playthrough. Let's just say that lack of game knowledge and choosing unfair for your first playthrough don't really have a happy marriage. However, when I did manage to complete each of the requirements on my second playthrough, I was so relieved after having been so stressed out that I almost started crying. But it's not over yet. You still have to meet with the committee, and if you're selected as the primary candidate, you have to not fuck up for like 4 more months, a task which is incredibly difficult considering all of your employees are breaking your no dating rule and are not being very sneaky about it. That said, let's have a quick flashback. Right before the competition to become the closing ceremony, you have to pick a route you want to follow. Your first investor and technically boss, Best Boy Fujimoto, your rival who I named Massive Bitch, and the reporter Aya Naya. Fujimoto and Aya can be hired to work for you, and additionally I believe Aya can be dated. However, in my playthrough, Aya just started aggressively dating all of my employees while I was left with zero pussy and a whole lot of scandals. I'd recommend playing your rival's route at least once. Both Fujimoto and Aya are still interesting, but one of the 3 definitely had a larger budget. In conclusion, Idol Manager is a video game that is very good. So good, in fact, that I played for 50 hours even though the porn was removed. In actual conclusion, Idol Manager is the first game I've liked more after spending weeks editing clips of it for a video, so essentially that means it's a masterpiece. Actually, a better way to round this out is to say that it's a masterpiece to me. I absolutely loved this game, but if the gameplay seemed too boring to you, then it definitely is. I really don't think this is a game you should buy if you're on the fence about it, because the gameplay really is a slog if you aren't into it. All of that said, a point I never really touched on is that Idol Manager is a game about making music. It's a game about making pop Japanese music, and since there's an end credits song with vocals, I guess this means I finally get to make the outro I've always dreamed of! Yeah!